Well, everyone, welcome to the first in a series of book talks about Fyodor Dostoevsky, which the Carmel Institute at American University here in Washington, D.C. has planned to mark the 200th anniversary of the birth of the great writer. The actual anniversary will be in the fall of this year, but obviously we started early. We will be recording this session and preserving it for all that's left of time and posterity and the internet. So if you happen to have connection problems, or you miss any part of this, or you join late, or you'd like to share this book talk, we will put it up on the Institute's website. We have to caption it per law before we do that, but we will let everyone know when this is up so that you have free access to it. Number 3 of my 4 points is that for questions, which we welcome, and feel free to throw them out there during the talk, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And so please use that, type in your question, your name and affiliation, and I will be, as the moderator, will be selecting the questions, going through them, and asking them of Professor Marullo. Well, which brings me to the names and the people. First of all, I'm Anton Fedyashin. I'm a professor at the history department here at American University. Russian and Soviet is my specialty. And I am back as director of the Carmel Institute. And the guest of honor today is, of course, Thomas Marullo, who is a professor of Russian at the University of Notre Dame's Department of German and Russian Languages and Literatures. He has a very distinguished career in Russian literature. You can see his full biography on his page with Notre Dame, but he is the author of several books on Ivan Bunin, on a book on Chekhov, a book on Tolstoy, a book on the physiology of St. Petersburg, and the book that in other words, he is an expert. But the book that we are focusing on today, obviously, for the 200th anniversary, is the second of what will be 3 volumes about the life of the young Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky. The first volume appeared in 2017, called Fyodor Dostoevsky in the Beginning, and it covered the years 1821 from his birth until 1845. The new volume just came out, and this is going to be the center of our discussion, although it will be broad-ranging. The second volume is just out and available for purchase, The Gathering, Fyodor Dostoevsky, The Gathering Storm, 1846 to 47. And then the third volume is in preparation, and that will be The Storm Shatters, covering the years 1848 to 1849. And so with that, I will pass it on to Tom Marullo, and he will speak for roughly 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll open it to discussion, Q&A, and so on. Tom, take it away.
Thank you so very much, Anton. My name is Tom Marullo. I'm professor of Russian literature and Russian language at the University of Notre Dame. This is my 45th and a half year at the university. I came in 1975, right? Before I get started, there's a lot of people I want to thank. Anton Fedyashin and Jane Carson at the Carmel Institute for putting this all together, for their utter graciousness in organizing, publicizing this event. And I'm just very pleased with the way it's going. And I'd like to thank the audience, all of you, for coming. I'm most honored and privileged and honored and humbled by your presence. I thought I was going to see everybody who came, especially friends and all this, and I was told, well, no, that's not the way it's going to happen. So, I mean, if you want to come and Zoom later on after the show, that would be more fun, okay? But I want to thank, and there's some new faces, there's some old faces, and there's certain people I really want to welcome, some old friends. One is Lauren Temperman, who is here today as professor of sociology at the University of Toronto, who was very instrumental when I was doing my book on Dostoevsky and codependency. Michael Katz, who is the CVR Star Professor Emeritus of Russian East European Studies, a very dear friend. We've been together a very long time at Middlebury College. I also like to make a special welcome to Amy Ferranto, editor of the Northern Illinois University Press, imprint of Cornell University Press, who I've worked with on a number of books, and also Michael Morris of Cornell University Press. I would like to just say a special hello to them. More alarmingly are several of my former students who are in the audience and who have been emailing me all week saying they were going to heckle me throughout the performance, okay? The problem being is that I failed these individuals in Russian 40 years ago, and they have just been waiting for their time to exact their revenge. Let me tell you that if you act up, Professor Fedyashin has the virtual police to deal with it, okay? I'm only fooling, okay? These students are all personal friends of mine. I've had them 35, 40 years ago. They were A+ students 40 years ago, and they are A+ people and professionalism now, okay? To all of you who showed up or showing up, I understand there's a large crowd. I'm really very grateful. It's individuals like yourself that keep me going. Right now, I'm working on my third volume on Dostoevsky, and I'm dealing with Dostoevsky and the Petrashevsky Circle. And I have a huge work table and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of materials. You can imagine how the Russians, or the Soviets and the Russians, have published on the Petrashevsky Circle, on early Russian socialists, on the period. And I look at this and my heart kind of flagged, my spirits kind of flagged. And because of something like this, you all kind of keep me going, and for that, I am very grateful. Okay, in today's talk, what I'd like to do is two things. Tell you about my research and writing in Dostoevsky, and equally more important, to talk a bit about my own journey as a researcher and scholar for the past 50 years, especially for those young people in the audience who are contemplating or preparing for an academic career. What have I learned about Dostoevsky, and what have I learned about research and writing? About 30 years ago, I was approached by an individual named Ivan D. He was an independent publisher in Chicago who had gotten a hold of a set of diaries by the Russian writer Ivan Bunin. It was called Ustami Buniniv. And he thought it would be a good idea to publish them. So he called the people at Northwestern University asking the people there, who does Bunin? And it was people like Saul Morrison and Andrew Wachtell, Lord love them, said Marullo at Notre Dame. And so he contacted me. I knew the diaries, but I thought they were rather schematic and superficial for publication. And since I had been working for Bunin years, I had all kinds of other things, letters, memoirs, articles about him. And I made Ivan D a counter proposal to publish a diary of Bunin, but with a fuller picture beyond what he had. And he agreed to it. He took a chance on me. It was the first book contract I ever signed, and it turned into a 3-volume work on the man, okay? I got an awful lot of press on this because I was very fortunate that my volumes on Bunin was coming in at the late 90s, all right? With the collapse of the Soviet Union, and everyone was interested in Russia, the revolution, the Russian emigration, and along with it, Ivan Bunin. From this experience, I learned 3 things. Number one, the importance of mentors, okay? Before D, I was publishing consistently, but not really understand what I was supposed to be doing. D was a seasoned publisher who took me on. He was a no-nonsense, hard-boiled curmudgeon, okay? When I was good, he praised me, and when I was bad, he let me have it. He said, and he told me a lot about publishing. Another individual at the time was Mark Ryev, God rest his soul, he was at Columbia. This man knew everything about Russian, about everything, except how to type. He would write all his comments in this very long hand, okay? He would read what I write, and he would send me a package. I would get these thick packages, and I would say, oh no, what's in there, okay? And he would write them on long legal pieces of paper, both sides, in his long hand, telling me what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. He would say, Professor Marullo, I have a few comments to make, and 30 pages later, he was still writing. So let me make it clear, for those of you who are thinking about this business, you really want to get mentors. You want to find mentors. And I think we have a very generous field. I think there are a lot of people out there who will give of their time to help you with your reading and research. Let me make it also clear that there are two types of mentors. There are the people in the flesh, okay? And then there are people who write their books, okay? I'm sure we have all come across a time when we had a book or an article or something and said, I cannot put this thing down. This is so good, all right? Look, if that happens to you, look and see what they are doing, why you like it so much, why you cannot put it down, and copy what they are doing. Now, let me make it clear. This is not plagiarism. Plagiarism is taking somebody else's ideas and passing them off as your own, all right? Watch what these people are doing. Watch their syntax, watch their writing, write their organization, okay? And then copy that. So my experience has been what? I've had mentors in the flesh, okay? Someone like Dee and Rayev, and I've also, of course, like everyone else, has read a number of very good books and copy what they did. Number two, when you turn around and you want to write, make sure, especially books, make sure you have a topic that is wide and far-ranging, especially for today's difficult publishing market. You simply cannot write on Ivan Bunin or Fyodor Dostoevsky. It will not work. It has to be Bunin and Fyodor Dostoevsky and someone or something else. Now with Bunin, I was lucky in that regard because over the 3 volumes, I had repeated revolution, war, emigration, okay? So I had a backdrop where I could tie Bunin to all of this, and that was one of the reasons why, number one, they were successful, they were able to be published, and why they were successful. So when you have a topic in mind, okay, but then throw it up against a huge backdrop for a larger type of audience. For instance, right now, I've just finished an edition of Bunin's Memoirs, okay? And it's Bunin, but it's a backdrop against Bunin's memoirs and a cast of thousands, including Tolstoy, Chekhov, Rachmaninoff, Shaliapin, Mayakovsky, Gorky, again, against revolution, war, and emigration. So keep that in mind. You cannot do select topics anymore. It simply won't work, not in today's market. You want to come up with something much more far-ranging where you do what you want to do, but you want to make sure you have a huge backdrop that it sells. Number third, you have to have a tough hide, okay? We all like applause, okay? We all want to be told we're brilliant, okay? But that's just not the way it works, okay? Make sure that when you get comments, both positive and negative, that you embrace them. That's how you learn, okay? So, and sometimes it stings, okay? Sometimes say, wait a minute, it's not right, it's not good. And it stings, you don't want to hear it, okay? You're hurt, okay? Better that you hear it though from someone in private in a letter or a missive than you hear it in a reviewer in public, okay? You have to make a choice. When do you want to hear it, okay? Reviewers, outside reviewers can be cruel, okay? I mean, they might write something like, it is a pity that Professor Marullo did not know that. Or they might write, Professor Marullo's complete inability to do serious scholarship is evidenced by the fact that. Now, has anybody ever written that about me? No. Do I live in fear that they will? Yes, okay? So one of the things that you want to do is that when you have people who write something negative in comments, and they send your book out to reviewers, mentors, and all this, when you get something not quite nice, that is negative, might be harsh, learn to embrace it. So before we go off to Dostoevsky, one of the things I want to emphasize the importance of mentors, the wide sweep of your research, and you have to have a rather tough hide. Okay, on to Dostoevsky. Fast forward about 10 years ago. I was working on Dostoevsky and I was doing a book on Netochka Nezvanova, which was his first novel, and the Poetics of Codependency. Again, notice what I was doing. It's Dostoevsky and something. Why codependency? If you look at any one of Dostoevsky's novels, they can boil down to a number of people that are just locked tightly, emotionally, physically, spiritually, okay? If you take something, for instance, like the brothers Karamazov, and you have Dmitri, Katerina Ivanovna, and Grushenka, you have that pair. And the three of them, you know, 2 women especially, I love you, I hate you, I wish you were dead, I'm going to save you, I'm going to Siberia, no, I won't, I wish you dead, he's guilty. This stuff goes on for pages, okay? This was, and I said, wait a minute, there's something wild going on here. There's something called, is this codependency, okay? And what I did was starting to look at theories and practice of codependency. This was again about, and when everybody was talking about this. And what I found absolutely fascinating is when you actually look at what the psychiatrists and the psychologists and the researchers were writing about the phenomenon of codependency, what it was, how did it act, what do people do, what don't they do, okay. And there were volumes that were coming out of this. I was absolutely stunned because with Dostoevsky, you could just say, every time they were saying something about a codependent, you would say, yeah, Dostoevsky, check, check, check. How did they act? Check. What do they fear? Check. What did they think about? Check. And what I found absolutely astounding, okay, is that Dostoevsky understood codependency, chapter and verse. He did not miss a thing after what all these scholars and people were saying. And this is, to me, the fascination of someone like Dostoevsky, that he intuited how something like codependency worked before it became fashionable and an object of scholarly study. So then I turned around and I said, okay, the book was done. I said, okay, let's go back. And the same thing I did with Bunin and the diaries, let's do it with Dostoevsky. Now, before we talk about what I did, I'd like to kind of talk about, all right, what are the problems of conventional traditional biography? How is what I'm doing different? There are a number of stunning, solid bios out there on all kinds of people, okay? Some of the stuff that they're doing on Stalin right now, especially in Russia, okay? I have my dear friend Doug Smith who's done a book on Rasputin, okay? The thing is this big and I couldn't put it down. My entire week went out the window. I could not let that book go. I mean, it was just excellently done. These are solid studies, traditional biographies. But, there's a problem with these traditional biographies. After you put the book down, you want to say, I know a lot about this person, but I don't know this person. And that's just the nature of the beast. Okay, the author of a traditional biography is highly selective. He must pick and choose among overwhelming amount of materials. And then when he does that, he has to render it in indirect discourse. My subject said this, he thought this, he did that. And then only with the few citations from the individual to prove what he is saying. In other words, the author of a biography, to me, gets in the way of the subject, okay? And that's just the nature of a traditional biography. You have yourself, the reader, the author, and then the subject, okay? The author of a traditional biography is rarely neutral. He or she is coming into it with biases, prejudices. He's out to prove something about his subject. His subject was this and not that, okay? Moving on to traditional bios in Dostoevsky, they suffer additional problems. If you take someone like Frank's mind, first of all, the bios are out there. They're not good on Dostoevsky, okay? With the exception, of course, of Joseph Frank's monumental study. But the problem here is with Frank's study is, number one, it's more than 40 years ago, okay? A lot of time, a lot of research, a lot of understanding has gone since that time. And like other bios of Dostoevsky, they suffer from the fact that Frank focuses on macro variables, the thing up here, huge cultural sweeps and trends, rather than the nitty-gritty down here on the bottom, the day-to-day facts and the events of Dostoevsky's life, okay? Moreover, biographies of Dostoevsky, they tend to skip over the early years of the writer. The biographers are anxious to get onto the big stuff, the big novels, and you can't blame them. But I think this is terribly wrong and terribly unfair to ignore the early period. We all have to agree that we have been influenced by our childhood, our adolescence, our youth, our parents, our family, our youthful experiences and encounters. To me, these are the most seminal factors of anyone's life, and more often than not, a writer. So, and that's what they're doing. They're kind of running past this thing. We want to know the writer, and this is the reason why I've spent so much time. My 3 volumes, one is 1821 to 1845, one is 1846 to 1847, one is 1848 to 1849, where you're taking a very small segment of the man's first 30 some odd years and really looking at them very, very carefully, okay? I would argue that this is the way we should be doing things. Another thing is they give short shrift, these biographers give short shrift to Dostoevsky's early works. And again, I think this is terribly, terribly wrong. Okay, you could say Dostoevsky's first novel, Poor Folk, is not The Brothers Karamazov. Yeah, okay, I agree. But then you can also, as I tell my students, you cannot turn around and say one fine Monday morning, Dostoevsky says, you know, I think I'm going to write The Brothers Karamazov today. That's simply not the way it works. The Brothers Karamazov, his final novel, okay, was what? The summation of his life, of all his ideas, his thoughts, his trials, his errors, okay? And it's important that before we even go to something like The Brothers Karamazov, we have to go to everything else before. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to do. Now, when I write these diaries, okay, first of all, let me clear what I'm trying to do. I go into these 3 volumes, or the study of Dostoevsky's early life, with absolutely no biases, prejudice, or preconceptions. Okay, I simply have no idea what is out there and what I will find. Okay, in other words, it's tabula rasa. Okay. Second, I give my actors absolute freedom to say what they want. And it's direct discourse. They're talking. I literally gather these people, lock them up in a room, and let them talk. The best thing I can compare this to is like a wake or the reception after. The person's dead, people start drinking, and they say things about the deceased that they would never say about him in real life. Now, this comes with its own set of problems. Gathering the material for these diaries, these 3 volumes, was not difficult. There's plenty of stuff out there. The Soviets and the Russians have put together these chronicles, these Yetupisi, you have these ukazatili, you have all these kind of, different type of different reference tools and all this sort of thing. They've done the work for you as far as setting things up, and it's first places to start. Gathering materials, again, is easy. Interlibrary loan. There's a thing now, you probably are seeing this in libraries, it's called Hathi Trust, where they're able to get a lot of old documents, old journals and all this, and make it available online. I'm amazed at the amount of really obscure stuff that they're able to get online. The other thing, if you run into a problem with research and with your research, the other thing I would recommend is the Slavic Reference Service at the University of Illinois, Urbana, okay? These people, this is Joe Lenkert, this is Yana Domsik, and this is Bella Irvin, okay? These people either know everything, or they can find the answer to it. I've been working with these people for a very, very long time. If I may do an aside here, when I was working with Bunin, Bunin's Memoirs, and Bunin was talking about the revolution, and he makes this statement. He said that a member of the Duma fell victim to cannibalism by the peasants. And I figured, this is an absolutely outrageous statement, okay? And you figured, oh, these are emigres talking, who could tell the more horrible story, okay? Of course, I would not let it rest. I couldn't let it rest, okay? And I wrote to the Slavic Reference Service. They still laugh at me now and say, this is Tom. Could you please tell me which member of the Duma? By the way, the Duma is the Russian parliament. There were only 4 of them historically. Can you tell me which member of the Duma was eaten by the peasants, okay? And you would turn around and say, my God, he's lost his mind. Don't they come back with an answer? They actually found the individual, okay? It made for a wonderful foot. Now, let me make it perfectly clear. This is horrible. All right. But on the other hand, Bunin makes a statement, it's verifiably true, and it makes one more thing about people will stay with the book, that Bunin is trying to convey the horror of the Russian Revolution. It's one thing to say, oh, this is what happened. But when you can verify it, okay, this is yet another. Okay, so one of the things you want to look at is the Slavic Reference Service. The materials, when you get all this stuff, and I look at everything, all right? And the amount is overwhelming. Now, people will ask, do you have the same, what do you do when you deal with these people, okay? You are also dealing with their biases. Many times when these people are talking, they're talking from memory. They're writing 30, 40 years after events. They're writing after Dostoevsky is dead, so they feel they can talk freely. Okay, they also bring to their accounts their own biases and prejudices, what they want people to believe about Dostoevsky. That they color the truth. Are they presenting Dostoevsky as a saint, as a villain, and all this? So you're dealing with people who are trying to remember things, okay? So you have the colorization of memory, and then you also have this business of biases and prejudices, what they're trying to show to Dostoevsky, okay? And the worst one in this is Lyubov Dostoevsky, the daughter, okay? The woman has written a series of memoirs. I don't think she said a single true thing about this. And this is where you come in with the footnotes and the endnotes, okay? You turn around, and sometimes people, who both among them, are saying positively erroneous, outrageous things, you know, and I put it in, let her talk, but then come in with the footnotes and saying, wait a minute, this is simply not true, okay? Also, these people, when they're writing, they're groupies. They're groupies with Dostoevsky, and they want their own moment in the sun. They want their Andy Warhol's 15 minutes of fame. So they prattle on, before they get to Dostoevsky, they prattle on about their lives, okay? I mean, they start like, I was born in Poltava in 1808, who cares, okay? And you have to get through all this stuff, okay? That, get past a lot of this stuff before you get onto Dostoevsky. Now, you're saying, do I have the same selectivity, problems of selectivity that a traditional biography has? Yes and no, okay? Yes, I cannot include everything, okay? There's just too much stuff going on, okay? But the selectivity is a relatively easy thing to do, okay? Because all of a sudden, what these people are doing are talking, and you realize, and then they let their guard down, and then there's the 2 or 3 paragraphs, aha, they're starting to talk. This is what I really want to know, okay? And like I said, it takes a little bit of patience, and you might go through pages of stuff, and then all of a sudden, they're letting their guard down, and they're starting to really, here's what Dostoevsky was like. And then what you do then is, with this, you start to see patterns. Okay, I have 2 volumes, okay? The third is on the way, all right? And if I have to say I have 2 volumes out there, it's really a lot of people who helped, okay? Amy Ferranto, editor of the press, Mike Morris, Carmel, these people at both Northern Illinois and Cornell University presses, they really took what I did, and they were extremely, and they are extremely professional, very dear friends, okay, and put these books together. I also had excellent readers. Irvin Weil at Northwestern, Kathleen Parthay at University of Rochester, and Jeff Brooks, okay, who was at Hopkins, okay? And they are also excellent readers, and with all these people, and by the way, these readers are also as tough as any reader as I've ever had. They're friends of mine. Okay, when I finished the 2nd volume, I wrote an ending, and by this time I was staggering to the end, and I wrote an ending, and I figured it's over, okay? And they read the book, and they said, it's fine, and all 3 of them said, Tom, we don't like the ending, you've got to do it again, which I did. When I see these 2 volumes in print, you know, it says Thomas Gate and Marullo, I feel very sheepish, because I feel, yeah, and a cast of thousands, okay? And I acknowledge all these people in my acknowledgements, but that doesn't tell half the story. If you're looking for get good readers to help you with this, and again, if I may recommend a press, Northern Illinois University Press, imprint of Cornell University Press, these people are simply excellent. Discoveries. Again, I have no idea what I'm doing, okay? Comes the 1st volume, okay? And, you know, with this, what they talk about Dostoevsky's early life, traditional biography will say, he came from this terrible family, okay? His father, there was no love in the family, okay? His father was a miser who starved them to death. And that's why you have all these dysfunctional families in his later novels, okay? It's simply not true, okay? This was a major discovery that I did with the 1st volume, and it has to be said. He came from a very loving, tight family. Okay, he came from a very privileged childhood, okay, of love, attention, education, 2 really wonderful parents, okay? Another one of the lore, okay? The father was a beast. He starved, the father, Mikhail, was a beast. He starved Dostoevsky into submission, okay? Dostoevsky hated his father hated him, Oedipal complex, murder, parasite, and bingo, you have Fyodor Karamazov and Dmitri in the brothers Karamazov. Not true. I spent an awful lot of time with the father. There was a lot of research on, there was a lot of accounts on him. He was a very decent man who did the best he could with his children, okay? Dostoevsky is always writing to his father for money. His father was a doctor, he didn't have that much money, but he always wanted to keep up with the other people, or his students, or when he was in the camp. And he was always asking his father for money, and the father gave him money that he really did not have. Most importantly, the father let Dostoevsky be a writer, okay? He had a brother named Mikhail, all right? And he wanted both boys to be engineers. The boys were artsies. They wanted nothing to it, okay? And Dostoevsky's father let the boys go. So we have two things here. He had a tight, warm family, a very decent father, and then finally, the piece de resistance in the lore, Dostoevsky's father was murdered by the peasants. The peasants hated him, okay? And again, more of this winds up in the novel. Not true, okay? There is absolutely no evidence that the man was murdered by the peasants. There's a lot of folklore, there's a lot of tales, a lot of it brought on by the family, but when they actually grabbed, and I have accounts of this, the peasants who were there or who had parents who were there, okay? And the Soviets and the Russians were publishing all kinds of things like this, okay? The stories don't match, they don't make sense, they get the names mixed up, and you can tell it's basically one person started a story, they're retelling another story, telling another story, telling another story. The truth of the matter was that he was sick and he died of apoplexy or a heart attack in the field and was not found until 2 days later, okay? Now, going on to the second volume. So this is what I'm trying to do, is set the record straight because there's a lot of mistakes there going on, okay? Unfortunately, our culture is full of this stuff. Okay, if I may do an interesting aside, Doug Smith in his book of Rasputin, there's this famous scene of Rasputin that's in the lore that one time Rasputin is at the party with the gypsies getting drunk and all this sort of thing, whereupon he exposes himself and then talks about his love life with the Tsarisa Alexandra. It's in the lore. Everybody knows this, okay? And Doug Smith turns around after careful research and says, it's not true. Okay, so of course I wrote to Doug and I said, you're no fun, okay? But on the other hand, okay, this is what the type of research that we're supposed to be doing, okay? So this is going on everywhere, okay? Where there are a lot of stories, some are true, some aren't, okay? And this is what I'm trying to do with Dostoevsky, is to set the record straight. Okay, the second volume, the lore. Dostoevsky was a success, okay? He was supported by Belinsky. Okay, Poor Folk was a success, the first novel. The second work, The Double, was not a success, and Belinsky withdraws his support. Okay, that's what we all know. Okay, two discoveries here. Okay, first of all, when Dostoevsky wrote Poor Folk, okay, it was a success, and the success went to his head. He is totally insufferable. He's a legend in his own mind. The bragging and boasting were nonstop. Now, okay, we can forgive him. He's 24 years old, okay? He claimed that he was heir to Lord Byron, Pushkin, and Gogol. He was going to have a brilliant future and have tons of money. By his own count, while he had been mentioned 35 times in the first 3 months of 1846 alone. Why else were people, quote, reading and rereading me in a frenzied way? Why else is my Poor Folk selling like hotcakes in the provinces? Why else are people treating my work as this is quote, as a lavished feast, reading them at the rate of only a chapter a day, so as not to exhaust themselves, but to smack their lips in pleasure? Okay, good stuff, okay? All right. The other discovery, so it went to his head. I mean, he really was impossible, okay, and all this sort of thing, right? And Belinsky was trying to hold him down, and I always said, he would tell Belinsky just to shut up, Okay, and I always said he was probably the only person in Russian culture to tell Belinsky, the famous critic, to keep still. All right, Belinsky wouldn't listen to Belinsky. The other discovery is how wildly excited everybody got over Poor Folk, the first novel. Why? It's 1845. Russian literature is in trouble. Pushkin is dead in 37. Lermontov, the second great star, is dead in 41. Gogol wrote Dead Souls in 1842, but that's it, he's silent. Okay, and everyone says, oh my God, where is our tradition going? We don't have anyone. The other problem was Russian literature did not have a novel of the city. They had it of the estate, all right, or they had it of the provinces, but they did not have a novel of the city. And that's bad because in Europe, Dickens is writing in England, you have Hugo writing in France, these huge novels about the city. With Poor Folk, which is the story of two people in St. Petersburg, they thought they had what? Now they have it. We have this urban novel, okay? You also have to realize the importance of literature in Russian society, okay? Literature is the only means at that time where they could discuss Russia's problems to advance it, hopefully, to some sort of progressive path, okay? There was also this question with the literature. If you don't have a literature, the feeling was, we're not a member of the community of nations. We're not cultured, okay? We're not civilized. We're still barbaric Russians. And they've always had this sort of, before the West, okay? So they were so wildly excited about Poor Folk. The problem is they believed they misinterpreted Poor Folk as social expose. Okay, the trial and travails of two poor people in St. Petersburg. That's not what the novel was about. The novel is about two people locked in a codependent relationship. The progressives wanted Dostoevsky. They said, aha, we have him. Okay, now we want you to write another Poor Folk. We want another social novel. Dostoevsky did not do that. He did not want to do that. That was not what he was doing, okay? And he writes other things, the other pieces that are coming up, The Double, The Landlady, Mr. Prohachin, a novel in 9 letters, where he's not talking about social problems, he's talking about problems of people, of humans, in dislocation and disintegration. Needless to say, the progressives were absolutely furious with him. They were so bitterly disappointed. And when they struck hard. What they did was raise Dostoevsky to the level of a man God, a savior, a messiah. And when he didn't come through, they tore him down. And that, if you think about it, is kind of the kernel of a lot of Dostoevsky's later novels, including The Devils. So this whole business of putting somebody up on a pedestal, then tearing him down, which comes 30 years later in a novel like Devils, was actually part and parcel of his own life. And when they struck, it was bitter. Let me read from Ivan Bunin, who recalls what happened. Any new appearance in literature, any new talent made for me an indescribably joyful impression. I rejoiced over any literary success. Never did the slightest feeling of jealousy possess me. Just the opposite. I needed authorities with all my very being. And in the absence of genuine heroes, I worshiped little idols who were erected by people close to me and whom I respected and believed in. The little idol is Dostoevsky. We put little idols on pedestals and worship them with genuine enthusiasm. With incense and bowing, we almost lost our minds. One of these little idols made us happier than others. We carried him in our arms around the city gates. We showed him to the public crying, here is a recently born small genius who in time will kill our present and past literature. Bow to him, bow to him. We herald him everywhere, in salons, on the streets. One lady, blonde and shapely, with airy curls and a brilliant name, read his work. Having heard so much about him, she wanted to meet him. a certain individual brought the man to her, saying with ecstasy, "Here he is. Look, here he is." So you can see the excitement. From that time on, though, our little genius became unbearable. In no way did he want to feel the earth under his feet. Invariably, he demanded that we lift him as high as possible so that everyone could see him. Constantly, he raged and cried out, "Higher, higher." Our arms grew numb as we raised him, but he still raged on and cried out, "Higher, higher." When we tried to cut our little genius down to size, he began to reproach us for being jealous of him, for hating him, for lacking the strength to lift him higher. In a fury, he jumped from our hands, dashed about, raised his head back completely, and in an unusually majestic way, marched through the crowd, surprised that people did not notice him and fall at his feet when they saw him. The little idol imagined himself in gold in a hall, glittering and magnificently lit, with lavish and mysterious boudoirs, with diffuse light and elegant couches, as in ancient Russian stories. But then the vision disappeared suddenly, and again the little idol saw himself in his poor attic, on the coarse Turkish couch in which he had bought in a flea market. Having wiped his eyes and glanced around, he sobbed and in horror covered his face with his hands. So you get this whole idea of, this says very nicely what happened, the intensity which they raised Dostoevsky up, the intensity to which he responded, and the intensity to which he fell. They wrote all kinds of vicious things. This is a poem that went around St. Petersburg about Dostoevsky. A night of mournful cast, Dostoevsky, dear grand and tall, like a new pimple on literature's nose, redly do you glow to all. Although a new writer, joyfully you dethrone one and all. The emperor praises you, even Lichtenberg is enthralled. To you, the Turkish Sultan will send his wisest men, but the grand reception before princes, no one knows where and when. Now a myth and a puzzle, you have fallen like a finished star and sneezed your pug-like nose at a red-haired beauty from afar. How tragically inert you looked at the object of your light, and so close to death did not perish at your artful height. From the envious cliffs, bend your ear to my request. Cast your ashen glance, hurl it at me, your guest. For the sake of future praise, such extremes you see are quirks, but separate the double was the second error, but separate the double from your unpublished works. Okay, so you can just see what, and this is all new. This is the first time anyone is bringing this out. Now, the amazing thing about this, is that where you're holding on to all of this is that Dostoevsky is still writing. The stuff is not good, okay? But in these early works, okay, he's doing things that you will see later on. He's writing about very disturbed people with huge psychological, spiritual traumas, okay? He's only 26, 27 years old, okay? They suffer from paranoia, anxiety, and guilt. They view the world as conspiracy, not community. They rage that they, the meek, do not inherit the earth so much as they eat it. They want love and attention and respect from without to assuage the pain and emptiness from within. They experience fevers and trances, nightmares and hallucinations. They encounter thunderbolts and bombshells and see specters and ghosts. They engage in sadomasochism and commit sins of omission and commission. They offer brazen excuses, false confessions, and apologia per sua vida. All these weird little people you're going to see again in other novels. In the double, you have a clerk who splits into two halves, a junior and a senior. Okay, and this split is going to be a major mainstay of Dostoevsky's later fiction. You're going to have someone like Mr. Prokhachin, okay, who is a miser, but tells everybody that he's a Napoleon above it all. And again, you hear echoes of Raskolnikov, who also thinks that he is a Napoleon, okay? In The Landlady, you have a young man and an old man contending for a young woman. And again, you're going to see that in the brothers Karamazov in the struggle between Dmitri and Fyodor over Grushenka. You have other things. For instance, the really powerful one is the novel Netochka Nezvanova. This is his first attempt at a novel, okay? And what he has is he has scenes there of a musician who thinks he's a genius and an extraordinary man. And he has a crowd who turns around and says, yes, you are. But he's afraid to pick up the violin and the crowd turns on him. So you have this business of the genius, the extraordinary man. You have a very uncomfortable scene where you have of implicit pedophilia. The man is a stepfather and he has this little girl and he exposes himself. It's implicit, okay? And again, you're going to see ramifications of this in Tikhon's confession. In Stavrogin's confession to Tikhon, where he rapes the little girl. You have a very ugly scene between two little girls. Netochka is another one, which is a very passionate, there's kind of a sexual wrestling match that goes on. And you can see that these two women are entwined with each other. And you're going to have feelings like, wait a minute, this is Grushenka and Katerina Ivanovna, okay? The important thing about this is that these things are not good. But in this are kernels of things that will assume major proportions in his later novels. And he does it 20, 30 years before that. And I find that absolutely fascinating, all right? The thing that we want to remember is that, okay, Dostoevsky is still writing. Maybe other people put him on a pedestal and took him down. But then we kind of know that, you know, being fans of Dostoevsky, we're going to put him back on that pedestal and we're going to keep him there. Thank you.
Tom, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great, super. That means everyone else can also. Thank you for your great talk. A lot of stuff in there to think about. We've got questions coming in, and again, I'll encourage my students who are listening in and anyone in the audience to please use the Q&A function and to hop in there and write your question. We also have an international audience because we have people listening in from several continents, including from Russia. And I actually, you and I got questions even ahead of the talk. One of them from Professor Larisa Sobogeva, the editor-in-chief of Questio Russica Journal in the Ural Federal University. That's in Yekaterinburg, Russia, ladies and gentlemen, in case you you don't know. And one of the questions she asked was of you, obviously, was what was the most unexpected for you in Dostoevsky's letters?
That he was a person, that he had the same struggles that we did. You know, we have this as we put these people up on pedestals, okay? And deservedly so, okay? The big thing is when he's writing about pain, he's writing about uncertainty. Will I make it? Will I not? Do I have enough money to get through the day? Okay, I'm lonely. I don't understand things. I have friends. I'm overwhelmed. I love my life. I hate my life. What's come across about this approach, and this is also with Bunin, is how terribly human these people are. And in a way, they're gifted, they're geniuses, but they're just like us. And that's one of the things I wanted to do is say, wait a minute, okay? And it is their pain and suffering and their mistakes that makes great literature. I mean, I said in my book, I said, you know, if people did not make mistakes, you would have no literature, okay? And these people and they say, okay, how do they know this? How do they express the pain? Because they're going through themselves. And the way I have it, literally on a day-to-day basis, the tremendous humanists, they are people like ourselves. That's always the biggest surprise.
Excellent, thank you. A question from an AU alum, Tom Pedrick, who suffered through more than one of my classes here at America. This is what he writes. By the way, these kids live Dostoevsky when they take my classes. So
well, you know, it's funny because I teach Russian 102. I teach Russian 102, and they do some things on, you know, just, you know, like, oh, here is a Russian writer, Fyodor Dostoevsky. I make my students bow their heads. Okay. Anytime, like I said, and we repeat the sentence, you know, on Ruski pisатель, Fyodor, and I said, right, bow your heads. And they know that every time they see it in class, they must bow their heads. So we're on the same page.
Excellent. Excellent. Here is Tom Pedrick's question. Dr. Marullo, I've long wanted to understand Dostoevsky's incarceration in light of his conservatism and belief in an ordered society. In short, did Dostoevsky believe his mock execution and penal labor were a just punishment for his participation in the Petrashevsky circle, something you began today's talk with?
Yes, you know, it's rushing a little ahead, but it's interesting when he's picked up, you know, for the Petrashevsky circle, he doesn't fight it, okay? And when he hears his sentence, he doesn't fight it. He says, I've deserved this, okay? He knew that he was doing something wrong, that he was on the track, and he had put his life in hold, okay? And this is beyond, you know, Russian shtick, you know, in the sense of like, oh, I must suffer for the world, you know, this sort of thing, right? There's something here that's very painful that when he's on the way to, when he's ready to go to Siberia, he turns around and he says, I deserve this. I was on the wrong track. I believed in socialism. That's not right. Okay, I was on the wrong track and I need to put my life. He really does. He doesn't fight it. Okay, he just turns around, and this is not theater or something. These are some very painful letters in the last part of the third volume, where he says no, and he's looking. I won't say looking forward to it, but he said this is something that I need. I have done wrong. I was on the wrong track. And when you think about it, he has, for instance, he grew up in a very religious background. The early letters, he's always talking about God, praising God, thanking God, hope God, and all this sort of thing, right? He's lost all that altogether, okay? And he realizes that, wait a minute, he has really been on the wrong track. And this will somehow be some kind of curative epiphany or something like that, which his time in Siberia was.
Excellent. I think I mentioned to you, but maybe I didn't. I'm a historian. I'm not a literature specialist, but I teach a class. I teach classes that are focused on literature every now and then because it's a great way to approach Russian history. And I'm doing a class this year called Dostoevsky's Russia. And so my kids, many of whom are on this Zoom right now, we started with poor folk this semester, discussed White Knights last week, and they are currently going through House of the Dead. We're approaching things chronologically. I'm contextualizing everything in the broad scale of Russian and European history. So you'll get some questions about those also. Excellent. A question from Alexis Vinogradov. Who are your recommended translators of Dostoevsky? Excellent question for an audience, many of whom may not know Russian.
The Oxford series. Okay, I mean, you look at some of the things like, you know, when we were first starting out, you know, the translations were terrible. I mean, you know, the Oxford series, anything that's done by Oxford University Press, okay, is just excellent. Okay, I think and Dostoevsky, if you look at the Russian, you know, he's not a stylist. Okay, the Russian is very difficult and all this, yes. Right? Yeah, anything coming out with Oxford University Press, I would say go with it. And they've done all the big novels.
Excellent. Yeah, and I've actually heard it said from many people, and I actually agree with the statement that there are cases in which Dostoevsky is easier to read in English translation than he in the original Russian. As a native speaker, I know because the Di Prichastne Обороты, his verse is very, very heavy in general. This is not Turgenev, through whose books you slide through them because the language is so easy. Dostoevsky made it.
He's not a stylist. Like I said, when I did my first Dostoevsky, this is 50 years ago, and they had these old cranky the Constant Garnett things, you know, these old cranky translations and all this stuff, right? And I mean, you know, it's just like, oh, this is internal. I don't understand this. You know, the sentences are too long. Okay, they have something they've kept in, you know, a Western audience or an English audience, speaking audience in mind. And again, he's still not an easy read, but I mean, at least you have a fighting chance to get through these things.
Excellent. Lucy Sobel, one of my students right now in the Dostoevsky course, what do you think the main effect of Dostoevsky's arrogance after Poor Folk was on his writing?
What happened with this, it wasn't so much the arrogance, he was constantly running out of money, okay? He kept telling how great he was, okay? Underneath it though, there's always this doubt when he had failure after failure after failure, okay? Now there's two ways to go with this, all right? You give up or you become more arrogant, okay? You blame everybody else but yourself, okay? So his writing, he's always broke, he's writing fast, he's saying, I'm ruining my works. The critics are going after him like saying, oh my God, another failure, ha, 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 okay? What's very interesting though, the critics are saying, he's got the kernel of something. They know this is something entirely different, okay? But his writing, especially in this period, is hurried, is fast, he's not feeling well, he's got the creditors at the door, he's getting involved with the Petersburg circle, okay? It's both arrogance and also sort of deep, and this is the other thing, this deep doubt, can I do it? The important thing though is that he keeps going.
What do you believe, let me put you on the spot here with a short but very difficult question. What is the key to understanding Poor Folk? Is it the codependency ultimately that you spoke about?
It is two people, it's not social expose, that I have to make clear. It's two people locked in a struggle for dominance. Look, it's two people locked in a struggle for dominance. I will take care of you, you poor soul. No, you won't. You're the poor soul. Okay? And it's this codependent thing, all right? And, for instance, they write each other letters, and of course, they live right next door to each other, and he keeps peeking at her in the window, which is another thing. We got to voyeur her. He kind of peeks at her. There's a ugly sexual kind of, or he'll say, people are saying things about me. Don't believe her. Don't believe what the landlady said, or don't believe this. There's a hazy feature about this guy that is very disturbing as far as his attitude towards women. Now, what Varvara should do is run like heck, but Varvara likes the contest. Okay? And they're upping each other over and over again until finally Varvara breaks it and says, hi, I'm marrying a rich guy, you loser, I won. Okay, it's a cruel thing that she does. But on the other hand, you also know that the man that she's married, that the contest is going to continue. She's not marrying the man for love. So in here you have this business of people locked in struggle for dominance. They talk, Dostoevsky wanted equality. This is what he would eventually want. It always winds up in this type of, and who's on top and who's on bottom and all this sort of thing. That's what Poor Folk is all about, okay? And if you really sit down with this novel, okay, there's a lot of very sick things going on. Now, Belinsky wouldn't see it. Belinsky wouldn't see it. He said, oh, these are two people in the city, and it's, the society. Mm-hmm. It's not true. Dostoevsky has a good job. He's got a good boss. The boss gives him money.
Yep.
Okay, it's not, you could come up with the Dickens, terrible conditions, living conditions and all this sort of thing, all right? But it's his way, and there's a terrible kind of sexual aggression against either. And they never touch each other, they never see each other, they write letters, okay? But that's basically what's going on in there. And that kind of struggle for dominance between men and women go right through the entire part of his novels.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next question from Jacob Nemeth, former and future student, as he puts it. Do you believe Sonia as a character has to be female for the plot to work? Could Raskolnikov's rant on Napoleon work if it was told to a male character, such as Razumihin, for example? Yeah. Many, many thanks for the lecture. And of course, for those who may not know, Jacob's asking about a novel that comes later, of course, than the period we were talking about. And that, of course, is Crime and Punishment.
Sonia is necessary. And Barbara Helt wrote a wonderful book called Terrible Perfection about the problem of Russian heroines. They're just too good, okay? And Sonia is that, okay? And all this stuff. Sonia is more, if you look upon Sonia, it's the femininity beyond the woman as more as a feminine force, the healer. In other words, if you want to do kind of gender studies on this thing, which I think is very valuable, okay? You have the male, the dominant, the aggressive, the hierarchy, the militarism, the brutality, and all this sort of thing. She is what sort of this feminine Russian force. Now, she brings in, you know, spirituality and Lazarus and all that sort of thing, and the New Testament. There's something deeper going on here in this novel, that she is this feminine, healing, maternal, Mother Nature source to bring this guy back in. With Razumikin, it won't work. First of all, you can't take Razumikin seriously. I mean, he's all over the place. He tries to do it. He doesn't understand. And he's the male, we'll fix it. Okay, we'll get you a job. We'll get you a translator. We'll get you a nice apartment and everything will be fine. Okay, Razumikin, and he's a good character. He's Razum common sense. Okay, but that's not what's needed here. You need a feminine type, and this is where Sonia, and I find Sonia irritating, okay, and all this sort of thing, all right? But what's going on, it's not a question of woman as biological figure, okay? More of a spiritual, healing, feminine, Mother Nature type of thing to bring him back. It's very interesting. If you look at the end of the novel, the epilogue, she's in there in nature. I mean, you got this whole natural scene, and she's right there in nature. And she's the mother figure, not only to, and it's more of a mother type of figure. And she's the mother figure to all the prisoners. Okay, all the prisoners love her and everything else. And she's kind of this mother figure to all of them. So it's a larger figure. Yes, you need Sonia, but not in the traditional sense of a woman. And Razumikin simply wouldn't work.
Excellent, thank you very much. Listen, let me quickly follow up. You mentioned nature a second ago. The urban-rural divide, which is present in almost every work of Dostoevsky, starting with Poor Folk, by the way, the happy memories of the childhood in the village out in the open, and then the horrors of the city. What in the letters that you've seen explains Dostoevsky's fixation on this duality?
He has, when he grew up in the provinces, okay? He grew up in a place called, he was in the city, but they had a summer place called Daravoy, all right? It was a summer thing. And there he was free, he got out from under, he could run around, you know, and you know, they would play cowboys and Indians, they would all kinds of things, that nature thing. But, you know, I have a problem when they start talking about their youth in the country. I don't believe it. I think it's a fantasy. Okay, in other words, Varvara will say, oh, when I was in the country, everything was all carefree and all that sort of thing. Somehow they're looking for a life beyond what they have now. It's an idealization, it's a utopia. It doesn't ring true. Do you really believe Varvara was happy in the country? Do you really believe that? You just can't. I mean, that's just not who Varvara is. She's a deeply unhappy person. And they have this thing like, oh, in the country, it was better. So yes, he did love the country. The country does not really figure in the novels like it does Tolstoy, Turgenev. There you've got nature. It's always very difficult with students because if you do the Russian novel, Tolstoy, Turgenev, pages of nature, pages of description, pages of seasons, you know, and the kids get, you know, restless with this. It's not like that. He doesn't have those kind of scenes. And when they turned around and said, oh, I remember when I was younger and in the country and running around and free and all that sort of thing, to me, that has always been a fantasy.
Excellent, thank you. Question from Jason Trask. Is there any evidence that Dostoevsky read Schopenhauer? The way you describe Poor Folk as a fight for dominance sounds very Schopenhauerish.
No, okay, not that I have seen. What's fascinating, though, is Dostoevsky anticipated people like Schopenhauer. He anticipated people like Freud. He anticipated people of codependence. He was, you know, these people are, you know, some of these Russian writers are just totally nuts, right? But on the other hand, they're also mystics. They see things that we don't, okay? What I find so fascinating about Dostoevsky and the other novels is like, you know, you take something like Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, okay, a little bit off the topic, all right? This is the thing about a story about a woman who had an affair in St. Petersburg in 1870. Hello, okay? But then you turn around and say, why does this thing last its time and point? Why does it go beyond its time? Why can't we still read it now? And it makes sense. And this is also Dostoevsky, all right? These people see things in their own time and reality that are universal problems that go beyond, this is what I find fascinating about Russian literature, their time and space, and go and talk to us now. The other thing is that I grew up with these novels. I always tell my students, Anna Karenina is my friend. And they think, he's nuts, okay? And the way it is, because you read Anna Karenina, you won't understand Anna Karenina until you're married. That's it, okay? Number one, all right, number one. But number one, you read Anna Karenina at 18 years old as an undergraduate. You read it 22 as a graduate student. You teach it on a cycle of every 2 or 3 years, okay? And you're also growing up and having life experiences and maturity and all this stuff. And you turn around, like, you know, the 99 millionth time I've read it, wow. You know, it makes even more sense than it does now. And the Russians are unbeatable when it comes to these type of insights, either Dostoevsky or the Karamazov, okay? You just sit there, and I've done it, we've all done it a gazillion times, right? And each time I'm saying, and as you grow older in your own experiences, your own spiritual journeys, your own relationship with God, your own relationship with your family, and all this sort of thing, you grow with these people. So I always turn around and said, this is kind of this extended family that I've had, and in a way, I really do mean that.
Excellent, thank you. Another question from Larisa Slobogova. Are there any moments in Dostoevsky's biography that are difficult for a modern person to understand?
No, I think they're so terribly human. What's hard is the intensity. What I think is hard is the intensity. When they disbelieve, when they challenge God, they really challenge God. When they challenge the universe, they really challenge the universe, okay? I mean, especially this rebellion and all this sort of thing, all right? The insights, that's difficult, you know, how deep they go in reality. You know, we in the West, you know, we're up here, we're on the surface, you know? And I always joke with my students, they say, well, in America, when we have a problem, what do? We throw money at it. And if it doesn't work, what do? We throw more money at it. We keep more money at it. We think that it's going to solve it, right? The Russians, because they have had a very difficult life, not much, you know, they go down deep. So what's difficult to understand about Dostoevsky is not so much the experiences. They're human. It's the intensity of the experiences. We all go and rebel. We're all rebellious. But when they rebel, like Dostoevsky, like Ivan Karamazov, he takes on God, the universe, the world, okay? And you know, that's the part that I find that's the part that's difficult for all of us to understand, but that's also the majesty of the novel.
Excellent. Question from Mark Halsema.
Oh, hey there, Mark, former student. There he is.
This is what he writes. You are obviously enthusiastic about Dostoevsky. At volume 3 through 1849, you must still have multiple volumes ahead of you until 1881, when Dostoevsky dies, correct? Or do you call it quits before 1881?
I'll kill him, okay, and all this stuff, all right? Mark has been, and again, there's a whole series of, I'm very sad. I'm telling the audience here, I thought it was going to be like a Zoom classroom where I would get to see everybody, okay? Unfortunately, we can't do that. All right, what I would like to do when I get through this, I mean, you know, one of the things that needs to be done, we're taking once is Dostoevsky in Siberia. Nobody's done it, okay? So the plan is, you know, I mean, how much longer am I going to go on this? You know, we'll see, all right? But, you know, I'll be 70, I'll be 72 in April, okay? But the one thing I would like to do, once this is done, okay, is I would like to do at least the Dostoevsky in Siberia, because that's really, I mean, you have the House of the Dead, okay? And he's talking, okay? But there, again, what I would like to know is, you know, get the accounts of the prisoners. What was he like with the prisoners? What was the prison like? What was he doing? What was he doing on a day-to-day basis and all this sort of thing? I think that would be coming up in that. So the plan, you know, God willing, okay, and all that sort of thing, is I would like to do the at least, and again, I don't know what's out there, okay? I thought I was going to do 1 volume on Dostoevsky's youth, and boom, we have 3, okay? And Lord love, Northern Illinois University Press and Cornell University Press are letting me do this, okay? It depends. That's the plan is, if, you know, God willing, I'd like to at least do up to the time before he returns to St. Petersburg.
All right, well, it's a biblical number, so good.
Yeah.
Good. Another question from Lucy Soboy, my student this semester. Very interesting take on poor folk. Do you think there was a way for Makar to have won, so to speak? She puts win. She's referring to your reference to the...
Yeah. No, it's an unequal match, okay? He tries, okay? And he tries, let me put it this, Varvara does it in action, wins in action. He tries to win it in words. Okay, Varvara takes all kinds of actions against him and all this sort of thing. I mean, the final scene of the novel, like, hi there, go get my wedding ready for me. Okay, go buy this, go buy. I mean, you know, Makar does it in words. He's very clever in trying to lay the guilt on, talk about things and all this sort of thing, getting her. He's a wordsmith. Okay, and what he's done also, he's very well read. And he's picked up all these trash novels from Europe, all these romantic novels and all this, and he imagines himself as some kind of romantic hero in these novels because he's taking a lot of this stuff out of the novels and putting in, and he thinks he sounds really intelligent, really cultured, really romantic, really masculine, and it's coming worse. You know, the first thing you do is you teach Makar Devushkin from the Russian word Devushka, which means girl. Okay, Varvara, speaking very traditionally, Varvara is the man, he is the woman. He doesn't have, he fights back, okay? He does it, but he does it linguistically, where she takes the action. She does, his letters are much more interesting than hers.
Fascinating take. Let me ask you a follow-up to that question. In the letters that you've worked with, that you've seen so far, what do we know about Dostoevsky's own romantic relationships with women early on in his life? Because the traditional biographies usually get into this with Isaieva and that whole disaster. What do we know about his own relationships?
None, okay? There is nobody there, and they're commenting on it, okay? That he's never had. Now, the only thing is that, you know, he's hanging around prostitutes, okay? And it's very veiled, okay? Because he'll turn around and say, he'll get some money, and he said, oh, good, now I can go see, you know, so-and-so, Minka Clarissa or something like this, all right? Natasha and all this sort of thing. She doesn't appear in the novel. So you kind of assume that they're prostitutes. And if you look at the Underground Man, that's what the Underground Man does, okay? There is no woman there, and many of them have commented. He had a momentary, he was with a woman, Avdotya Panayeva, who was Panayev's wife, okay? He had a crush on her. But he really is, you know, beyond this time, if there, you know, and the business, they all comment, there is no woman in his life. He doesn't dance. He doesn't like to dance, okay? He'll watch from the side, okay? He doesn't dance. He doesn't go near women, okay? And they do comment on that. There's no woman in his life. Now, he will periodically say, you know, I just got some money. I'm going to go see, you know, and he has all, and you assume that they're prostitutes, okay? I have no, they don't appear, but there is no woman in his life at this time.
Does this focus on codependency grow out of his family relations or things that he saw around him in life more broadly?
It's not in the family. It's the family. It's perfectly normal. Okay, it's almost embarrassingly normal. Okay, disappointed. I mean, I wanted. Oh boy, we're going to have a real dysfunctional family here. This is really going to sell. It's not there. Okay, the only thing I can think, you know, there's nothing codependent. He's not playing games with other people. Okay, he's kind of a loner. All right. And then when he has a few select friends, they are normal, healthy friendships. Okay. So he himself, at least at this stage, does not engage in this. Now, he gets into struggles with Belinsky, but it's not a codependent thing. Belinsky wants this, he wants this. Okay. He gets into fights with other writers because they're jealous of him. Nobody has had a sudden success that he has had, and then he fails. And of course, and like I said, he hasn't come. He's insufferable, and they all rejoice in his failure. But that business of codependency, where he's getting that from, it's certainly not in personal, it's nothing not in his personal life. He did not engage in those kind of struggles.
Thank you. Another question from Professor Sobolyeva. Your book is addressed to all admirers of Dostoevsky, but was there something to clarify specifically for Americans? That is, do you see moments in Dostoevsky's life that are understandable to a Russian person and surprising to people in other countries?
Yeah, the depth. I mean, in the West, we simply aren't that deep. We don't think about things, okay? We don't turn around and think about, Russians are fascinating, okay? I brought this up before. Russians go deep, okay? They really have an insight into, because of, they don't live on the surface, especially they go deep. To my mind, Russians are not Europeans, they're Asiatics. I mean, they really have this sort of, deep understanding and awareness. They sit still and they contemplate things. And then when they say things that no one would dare ever say otherwise. You look at some of the statements that Dostoevsky will do, or the situations, they're outrageous, they're wild, they're riveting. I read, it's not a nice thing to say, I read Western fiction, I'm bored to tears. I'm like, oh God, this is so boring, okay? Or I would say, Dostoevsky would have a great time writing this, okay? I think what's very difficult is sort of the deep awareness of where they're going, the rebellion, the anarchy, the artistic wildness of them that we, I just sit in awe. I'm doing a seminar right now called Russian Revolution. So where am I going? My favorite course, I go from, it's a multicultural, multimedia course. I go from Eisenstein to Stravinsky to Biely, and all to Andrei Biely, to Bunin, to Mayakovsky. And I'm sitting there, and the absolute kind of wildness and anarchy that they bring to their culture, very difficult for Westerners to understand. The tragedy of the Russians, okay, is that they are brilliant, creative people, but they've never had a socio-political system that could liberate their talents. And there are historical reasons for this thing, right? But when it comes to culture, I always tell kids, all right, take something like the 1812 Overture. Who else would bring in the cannons? Would a Western composer say, I'm doing a war theme, let's bring in cannons? Okay, and just to give them a basic idea of how wild they get. So I think what's very difficult for Americans to understand is the intensity that these people live life. Because we simply don't on the Western side, all right? Russians, I've been fascinated by Russians all my life. The Russian walks in the door, there goes my afternoon. There's something about these people that, one of the things I remember most dearly my experience with Russia was the last 15 years before the collapse. And, people would take you in and they would have these kitchen conversations. They would have this little kitchen and you start all night long. They would bring out the food and the booze, okay? And then you got to see them, who they were. The joke was Russians don't know the difference between hospitality and hospitalization. I mean, you had all this food and all this stuff. And then they would show you who they are. And I'm not Russian by background. I mean, I'm Italian-American from Brooklyn, all right? I mean, I was learning this thing. That's very difficult for Westerners. They say the crazy Russians, okay? And I'll agree, the crazy Russians, but they really have a special craziness that we can learn from.
Excellent. Question from Sam Wungren. I once read that
Hello, Sam, how are you? What am I? Go ahead.
I once read that Alyosha Karamazov's literary character is an amalgamation of several individuals in Dostoevsky's personal life. It's my understanding.
Sorry, Anton, I missed the character. One more time. Who's the
Karamazov? Alyosha.
Okay, but Alyosha Karamazov, yes.
It's my understanding that Dostoevsky took positive aspects of these individuals and created the Alyosha character along the lines of an ideal human. Is there truth to this notion? And if yes, is your research instructive on the identity of the individuals in Dostoevsky's life that he used to create Alyosha Karamazov?
Funny that you mentioned this. In addition to my diaries, I'm running a book on Alyosha Karamazov, okay? Because nobody understands him. Except me, I hope, okay? Dostoevsky always wanted to come up with his ideal character, okay? But then you turn around, there's only one ideal character to Dostoevsky, and that's Jesus Christ, okay? And people who are, even Zosima, okay? Father Zosima has a lot of problems. And what you have to watch with Alyosha, okay? He looks good. And compared to everybody else, he looks like the good character. There's a lot, but then you have to ask yourself, why does Dostoevsky make Alyosha suffer so badly? I mean, the novel's about him. I mean, people tear at him. They rip him to pieces. Okay, is it just because he's a good character? That's too simplistic. Okay, what Dostoevsky was trying to do was come up with some sort of ideal character, but not a saint. Okay, and because once you say he's a saint, you lose him. I mean, it makes no sense. You're doing hagiography, all right? Alyosha's got a lot of things going. Alyosha is very rigid. He believes in miracles, which Dostoevsky does not. I mean, that's why it's the great scene, Father Zosima's death, okay? They're all expecting a miracle, and Dostoevsky makes the body rot twice as fast as usual. It's just, I mean, I shouldn't laugh, okay? It's brilliant. He's trying to forge a decent character that's believable. And even at the end, all we have is a kid who's leading a bunch of kids. It's never, you know, he's got sexual problems, okay? He's very austere, it's all a pose. He's posing as a saint, okay? And Dostoevsky is saying, no way. Because if you don't knock it off, you're gonna become rigid, you're gonna become authoritarian, you're going to become the next Grand Inquisitor. Okay, it's a daring statement I'm making. Okay, and you know, intuitively I feel I'm on the right track. Okay, it's another book in Alyosha Karamazov. All right, so yeah, he's based on saintly models. There is no one. I would say Alyosha is a lot like Dostoevsky, the young Dostoevsky. He was quiet. He was a reader, very virginal, very religious. Okay, you know, he's taking a lot of his own background, okay? But that's not workable. A saint in the conventional hagiographical sense does not work in real life. And he really bounces Alyosha. And that's what's, why is he so cruel to this person and bounces him up and down and people rage at him? And that's an education, that's his own type of spiritual education. So the Alyosha Karamazov you have at the end of the novel is a hell of a lot more believable than when you first start. And it only takes 900 pages. And again, the other thing is that, you know, the open-ended quality of the Russian novel. You know, kids get very upset with me and say, are we ever going to read anything happy? Okay? And I'm saying, and I go right after them, I say, happy endings are stupid. Of course, by this time, no one's breathing, all right? What do you learn from a happy ending? You walk out happy. Have you challenged, have you changed? Have you challenged your system? Have you thought about life? I always tell people, when I become a world dictator, the first thing I will do is get rid of the Hallmark Christmas channel. That's got to go, okay? That simply has to go, okay? The Russians will turn around and say, there's no such thing as a happy ending. Who can turn around and say, my life is a happy ending? It doesn't work. What the Russians will allow you to do is say, no. The Russians, though, will allow you moments of happiness. Now, there's an important distinction here. There's a happy life or a happy ending, which is stupid. It doesn't exist, all right? The Russian will allow you moments of happiness. And that's what you live for. That's what you look for. And that's what keeps you going. So Alyosha Karamazov, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Last question, because we do have to wrap up. How does White Nights fit into Dostoevsky's early oeuvre, is his works? And is the key to that also the question of struggle, competition of wills?
Yeah, very much so. It's all in there. Yeah, he keeps looking at this from a kaleidoscope. He's got the competition, he's got the codependency, and he keeps looking at it from different points of view. That's what I think is going on there, okay? And it's interesting because the White Nights, you know, you would turn around and say, okay, it's not dark, it's white, so something nice is going to happen. He changes the background because usually his cities are always dark, smoky, and all this sort of thing, right? It's a thing that he does on his own there to kind of trick the reader, like, you know, this is going to be good, and it's not. I think especially in his early stories, and they're not good. I mean, they're not Karamazov, okay? but they're sketches. He's constantly playing with this thing. And he's turning around, and Tolstoy does the same thing. Only when we, the Russians think, the Russian writer thinks the human person is fragmented in a million pieces. And the idea of the game is we want to start pulling it together into some type of integration. And it's an ongoing process. There's no end. It's an open, the Russians will defy an open end, will defy a conclusion. Everything is open-ended. The story still goes on, okay? And that's what I think he's doing in his early stuff there.
Tom, thank you. One last thing that just came in from Amy Ferranta, and we'll end with...
Hi, Amy.
Can you say something about Kirillov in Demons being based on a real person in Nechayev's group, or else anything more about that novel? So,
that I haven't done that. I've taught devils, okay, and all this. Is this a real person? No, but let me do it this way. I'm doing the Petrashevsky Circle, and I'm doing a lot of things, and Dostoevsky is attending meetings of the Petrashevsky Circle. There are a lot of people there who you will see in the devils. Now, when I do these things, I resist the temptation to say, see, this is Stavrogin, see, this is Verkhovensky. You figure, okay, readers of Dostoevsky will make the connection, okay? What is very interesting here is that the people are the Petrashevsky, they talk about emancipation, they talk about legal rights and all this business, right? Where they're getting fascinating is when they're getting religious. Okay, politically, they talk about things that are never going to happen, all right? When they start talking about their religious universe, what they think they're trying to do, trying to build the kingdom of Christ, God, without Christ. Socialists to Dostoevsky were Christians without Christ. So they throw the Christ thing out, let's try it ourselves, okay? Which is part of devils, okay? And you have all these people, all right, who are talking about this. How are we going to structure this universe? But the trouble is, they're all frauds, all right? They're all postulating. They're all on power plays. They're all postulating and all this stuff. And Dostoevsky is listening to all of this, or they're talking, and Dostoevsky is saying, no, they're all playing at this. And then that's where you have the devils. Everybody is playing at being politicians, people. What's even more fascinating is, for instance, one person talks about beauty, that he's so burdened by beauty in the world. He's so oppressed by beauty that he goes for evil because evil is a lot easier to handle. Dmitry Karamazov says the exact same thing, word for word, to Alyosha. You have a wonderful character named Filipov. He's a wise ass. He's a student. He thinks he knows everything, all right? And he's always, and Dostoevsky is teasing him and all this. He says, here's some berries. Here's some poisonous berries. If you eat those berries, you will get cholera and die. So what does the kid do? The kid just stuffs his mouth full of berries. And this is Kolya Krasatkin in Karamazov, who's always lying under the train to see if he'll kill him and all that stuff, right? So is there a specific character? That I don't know. I'm not up to that. I'm not up to that volume yet, all right? But what's interesting is that in the Petrashevsky Circle, in this political thing, you hear so much of what's going on in the devils. Much more important is the business of religion, what they thought they were doing, coming up with a new society, okay? How would they do it, okay? And again, this is 30 years before the devils. So I hope that answers your question, Amy.
Excellent, Tom. Thank you very much. Listen, we're at an hour and a half over our planned time, but that's how it always works with great.
I've had a ball. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry I can't see you, okay? But if you want to Zoom later, that's fine, okay? I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you so very much for having me.
A great icebreaker. So again, the book is Fyodor Dostoyevsky, The Gathering Storm, 1846 to 47, but please look for Tom Marullo's other stuff, including the Dostoyevsky volumes, but not only those. And for all of the students and the guests, thank you very much for joining us. This is the first in a year-long series of talks about this controversial, fascinating, very deep, and eminently readable Russian writer. And we hope that you will join us for subsequent talks. Good night to all, and thank you again for joining.